So welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at Wars of Religion, France 1562 to 1598, from a French company called Fellowship of Simulations. This is a 3-player war game.
Which was the best part, frankly. We'll talk about that.
Yes,
but
designed by one Jérôme Lefranc. Hopefully that's pronounced correctly. If it's not, my sincerest apologies.
I'm
as sincere as they can be from an Englishman.
right, and I'm really impressed that an Englishman would even attempt to enunciate those words and pronounce them appropriately.
You know what? We've been butchering French words for 1,000 years.
Why start? Why stop now?
Why stop now? So, a 3-player war game. Not a lot of those out there.
No.
Although I feel like we're picking up more and more in the kind of the back catalogue and repertoire that we've kind of got to, because I think there's a space for 3-player games in wargaming.
Well, it's very
wasn't addressed in the past.
As we know, it's very extremely challenging to get 2 wargamers together. It's even more difficult to find that unicorn third wargame player.
Or it's like,
but it is cool though.
And
I think.
Or it's like a London bus. You wait for ages and have any, and then 2 come along at the same time, and suddenly you're like, oh, all these 2-player games I can't play because now I've got 2 wargaming friends.
Yeah, there you go. Throw those 2-player games away.
Yeah.
Right?
So, this was a game that had kind of popped up onto the radar because the theme of it is so cool.
Yeah.
I remember seeing pictures of this back in its kind of prototype phase almost a year ago, and it was like, oh, that looks cool visually, the style will look cool, and the theme was something that was very interesting. And I weirdly, I read a book about the Reformation earlier in the year, and that wasn't about the wars, and I was like, I kind of wanted it to be.
Sure, yeah.
And I'd known that this was on the horizon. I was like, I was really excited to play this. So, the copy that we played
is a prototype.
It's a prototype copy. It's a pre-production copy, and so we're going to talk about some things that may not necessarily be relevant if the final production is different from this.
Right.
Which I would hope that it kind of would.
Well, and we've tried to do our homework to see what the final version looks like. It actually looks very comparable to this. There may have been some minor changes or edits. I would have to say this was my only part of the game that was a downer for me. And I think they made an effort. Yeah, and I enjoy war games that use wood. I just think it's cool. Remember, I was initially attracted to Liberty or Death because it looked like
it looked good.
A Euro game with all those white and green and red and blue cubes. So I think we'll talk about it later, but the production I think fell a little shy for me.
Yeah.
And affected in some ways the playability.
Yeah, we sat down and we played this. I think we played, because there's the whole campaign game, and then there's 2 scenarios.
Yeah.
There's like the first half and the second half, basically. We played the second half. And as a game, you're kind of, you have this drafting phase where you build this hand of cards from the available courtiers that haven't died yet or have like joined your court. And the drafting part of it's really cool. There's some nuance there. And then from there, you have that hand of cards that's been drafted.
That's one part. That's one game.
Yeah, right? that's game number 1.
The drafting concept. Game number 2
is the court phase where you spend your courtiers doing almost like a little CDG. You're like, you can use a card for all sorts of different actions. There's a little menu on there.
And actually, they're asymmetric.
Yes.
Some of the actions are asymmetric, but also some of the diplomacy elements are very asymmetric.
And the courts themselves are totally different. And so you're going to spend that phase. I play a card, you play a card, taking it in turns, going round.
I'm going to remove your cube.
Almost all of those.
I'm going to place a cube.
Trying to raise money, trying to buy or do some diplomacy to get armies ready.
Very, very important to get armies.
Doing all of this, that's game number 2 in this game.
And game number 3
is the war phase, the Wars of Religion. Is you've done all of this preparation. Now you've got all these armies, you've got all this money. You then like go and do the wars. You have a big old campaign.
Yeah.
And you're going to spend all of your money to activate your armies of different sizes, who you have assigned leaders to, and there's all sorts of rules about how you do that. And it's going around besieging towns, fighting field battles, and it's kind of like an area. The map is divided up into areas, and you go around. I move into this area. There's 3 towns. I'm going to besiege one of them. Or
Yeah.
I'm going to fight a field battle, and if I win that, I'm going to then siege somewhere afterwards. And then once you've spent all of your money, or all of your guys have died,
Which it happens about 50-50, I feel like.
and you can't carry anything over. So like,
Yeah,
you want
use
to
it all or
expend
lose it.
yourself. Then you have, it's like, oh, it's the winter, and everyone goes home, and
Mm-hmm.
then you kind of reset, and you do it all over again.
Yeah.
So the game itself is almost like, because the rules aren't that long.
Actually, it's a very simple to grasp game, I think.
Yeah, there aren't numbers in the rule book, which is funny. So I don't know
No.
how many pages the rules are. But again, it's a pre-production copy.
Mm-hmm.
But like, learning it wasn't particularly difficult. But understand that it's like there's some different phases, and they're all entirely different.
Yes.
Like, they'll affect games in similar ways, but like what you're doing in the action phase looks and feels very different from what you do in the war phase. And so,
And because of that, I found that actually very interesting. Because I thought to myself, okay, put myself thematically into this process. I'm the League trying to oust I think the Royalists were together against the Huguenots.
yeah, the League and the
right?
Royalists are trying to oust the Huguenots.
At the beginning.
Yes.
And then at the end, the Huguenots and the Royalists kind of team up and go against the League. So, but I thought to myself, okay, I'm the League, you're my ally. We have very different victory conditions.
Yes.
My victory condition specifically as the League was tied to really the Huguenots, right? I had to get them down very far.
Did you have to have twice as many?
I had to have twice as many points, and basically points come from control of these cities. And so I had to think about that. How am I going to go about that, right? Am I going to attack? Am I going to do surprise attacks against an enemy city? Or am I going to try to do a little intrigue to take a city away from you, you're my friend. Can I have this?
Oh, we're friends.
We're friends. I want this area. Is that okay? Okay, I take it. You don't have anything to say about it. I roll dice and win. And then after that, it's like I had to have built a little bit of an army to kind of go around and take some areas by force that you then ultimately got.
All the stuff in the war phase that you win goes to the Royalist player.
Yeah.
And so then the League player who's helped accrue all that and get me close to my victory conditions then spends the next court phase doing all this, the intrigue, trying to then subvert their opponent and get them to win. Because my victory conditions is to have, like, both of you guys have not very many.
Right.
And you're trying to get him really low, and yours more than, or double his.
Yeah.
And so you're like, cool, I'm going to let the Royalist win all this war stuff, but you have to subvert it quick enough that I don't just win doing that, and you've helped me do that.
The other really interesting thing, I wanted to finish my thought before I go on, but that thematic element of I'm building my court, I'm negotiating with people, I'm trying to get some money, I'm trying to win some allies, and then in the end I'm going out and I'm trying to campaign, knowing that at the end of the winter, everybody, or actually before the winter starts, I think everybody returns home.
Yep, everyone just
So
goes
if I don't use it all, and if I don't spend it all, I'm going to lose it. But it's also very cool that we have to work together. Like, I could use my money to move your troops, and I think vice versa, although you didn't do that very much. It kind of hurt my feelings.
Well, I ended up taking all your troops with the king.
That's true. That was also kind of, while it sucked, the fact that you got my largest army, that I didn't understand that the first turn. The second turn, I changed my tactics, but that's an interesting concept. So that thematic, to me, experience of doing all these things, building, negotiating, warring, and then trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to stop you from winning while trying to meet my victory conditions, really, I thought that was the highlight of this game for me.
Yeah, and like a lot of good 3-player games, it's trying to pit your two opponents against each other and kind of balance everything so that you come out on top, right?
Yep.
In 2-player games, I'm just trying to do better than you.
Yep.
When you start getting into multiplayers, it's a bit more of the spinning of the plates whilst you succeed. And I felt that in this as well.
Oh, no doubt. I like to think, I tried to think of a good analogy for this, and I thought of a balance, a scale balance. whereas the Huguenots are one side, the Royalists are the other, and then my faction was kind of, I could put my thumb on this side of the scale a little bit, kind of bringing it down, but I didn't want it to go too far down.
Yeah, you have to. You have to win at the right time before I get out of hand.
And I think at the end, after we played, I believe it was. I think the scenario was 4 turns long, maybe 5. And
we did the 3.
Did we do 3 scenarios?
Yeah.
I just remember at the end of 2, understanding how the game worked and what mistakes we had made.
Yes.
It was like, oh, you've won. I mean, and there still was some, but we kind of went through it. I just thought the balancing act between the 3 players was fantastic. I love that tipping point where you switched allegiances as well.
Yes.
And if you're not preparing for that and getting ready for that and being in a position to take advantage of that, that's really what the core of this game is. Everything else I feel like is window dressing to get you to that point, but that's ultimately what you're trying to do.
And I really liked the feel of all of that. Like, you can do certain things and how things change during the game, but all of it is this, Reformation era balancing act of, like, regional power and diplomacy, and it just felt really cool doing that stuff. Like, what you're doing was very, very, very enjoyable to do.
I had a good time with it. The other thing that I really liked about the game was the event cards. Like these cards, I think we drew a certain amount of these.
Yeah, the war cards, I think you get
2 of
one
them,
or two
one
of
or
those,
2.
and you'd get one of your own personal events.
And it's just kind of like, oh, that's a neat little thing that I potentially will build somewhat around or understand, okay, I got to figure out how to use this properly. And there's quite a few of them, so you're going to have a lot of different opportunities.
And some of those are like really powerful.
Very powerful.
You don't have to make an attrition roll for your massive giant army. And you're
Yeah.
like, the difference between losing a guy and, the difference between like 5 dudes and 4 dudes can be a
It's huge.
huge difference if you're fighting battles.
And that's what these cards do, the war cards. It's like add a couple guys, you get a couple more movement points.
Yeah,
you
re-roll a die.
Yeah, re-roll a die, or you get +1 to a die. I mean, it's not huge, but in the context of the game, they're very important. And I kind of like that. There's some randomness to that because it's what you draw off the card, but I also liked that because nobody knew what I had.
Yeah.
And it made for fun because I remember playing a couple against our friend Mike, and he's like, oh. And I'm like, yeah. And that was fun. Like the asymmetry, I thought there were a lot of cool elements and differences that I didn't expect.
And I played as the royalist, and I felt, because I would think I was the only one who could levy, like, tax. And so I'm rolling to do my taxing, to move my tax up, and then at the end of the court phase, when it was going into war, I would convert my tax into, like, 8 money and 5 troops.
Right.
And that goes a very long way in the war phase. But that was something that I could do, and that you guys couldn't. But my foreign diplomacy looked very different to everyone else's.
Oh, yeah.
And who can levy troops from which foreign power, and you might be able to get, X amount of money and X amount of troops from one power. I might be able to get Y amount of money and Y amount of troops from the same power that's different because they treat me differently.
Yeah.
And I just thought that stuff was very interesting. Okay, you get the stuff from the Germans, I'll get the stuff from the English.
Yeah.
Like, how and when you go about doing those kinds of things was really neat.
And you're right, it's listed here, and they're totally different. I like that. Now, some of them were the same. We both could treat with Spain, right? But we got different things a little bit.
And I just think little nuances like that are just really neat in the game.
Yeah.
And then, after you have the call to arms, where the factions, I don't say minor factions, but the Huguenots and the League switch allegiances, that changes what they can do diplomatically as well.
Yeah.
You lose access to some, or you gain access to some foreign powers, and the Germans are like, oh, we like you guys now instead.
Yeah.
Just the little bits like that, where that would be something really complicated in another game, but it just is like, here's a little chart and it says, you can't do this before this happens. Like that's a simple implementation of an exception where a lot of games get bogged down in exceptions, and this one I felt didn't.
Well, and the only exception I think there were is on the court cards. whatever they're called, they will tell you how long those guys are in the war.
Yes.
Like this one says the 1st through the 3rd.
Yeah, and it's just turn 1 through 3.
So when turn 3 is gone, you got to get rid of this guy. And you know what? He may have been a really good guy.
Yeah.
These cards have, some of them have special abilities. Most of them just, it's basically one has there's an intrigue side and a war side or a combat side.
And it gives you a bonus to rolls that you're using.
Right. So it's, if you lose a guy like this, Armand de Ganton-Biron, it's like, oh, man, I was using him to great effect. But then you throw in that drafting thing, that even makes it cooler because you may take Armand and say, you know what? You ain't getting Armand.
Yeah.
And that was cool. It slowed the game down a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's okay because it was part of the fun, I thought.
Yeah.
Part of the interest.
The drafting was great.
Just a little long.
It adds some time to the game, but I'm going to get a couple guys, then my court gets moved to you, you draw 4 cards, give me 2, and put the other 2 back.
Yeah.
That get moved to our opponent, who's going to do the same thing. So I know I'm getting crappy ones from him.
No doubt.
But then it's...
And there were times...
How much do you help your ally?
Well, and there were times that I'm like, ooh, I'm going to give him this good card because we really... But
we
then
need to make some headway.
The other card, I'm like, I don't want to do that. No, you're not getting that one.
Yeah, or it's, I'm going to give you some good cards, but none of them are going to be the writers, who are the only literate ones in the game who can write treaties.
To move up victory points, which is a nice way to get some extra victory points. But you got to focus on it, like you said. It's only those, and I bet there were 2 or 3 of those in my deck. There weren't a lot.
Yeah, and I think one of mine, I may have only had 1 or 2 in the game that we played, and I think all my guys died. I don't know if you remember that.
I did, yeah.
Which was
every time you had a battle.
Yeah,
you would roll and your leader would die.
To see, and
which
it's
was
so
hilarious.
Unlikely. I think I lost 3 dudes, and it was like in a row.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the writer keyword, and there aren't many to start with, you can't write a treatise and publish a treatise, which is for victory points.
Yep.
And so, do I keep those away from you in the draft? Do I not?
Yeah.
I can see which regions are listed on the nobles for surprise attacks. I can keep those away from you.
So for instance, this one, Charles, I'm not gonna embarrass myself. That guy, he has you can see Picard and Normandy. So in those areas, Picardy is here and Normandy is somewhere over there. Yeah, I mean you would think I would know exactly where that was.
It's upside down.
Yeah, it's upside down, and it's a little
old.
Yeah, old looking. Yeah, but I can use him to do those surprise attacks or intrigues.
Those were surprise attacks.
Surprise attacks in those regions and in that region only.
Yes.
So it's, once again, I enjoy a game where you're kind of planning out your turn based on what you've got.
Yeah, and
I like that.
And the drafting aspect is like, cool, I can keep those away from my opponent.
You can't hurt
so
me
I know
there.
he's less likely to, at least.
There's just a lot of levels to this game. I feel like it's very similar to an onion, and you're just going to keep peeling. Yes. And I even think on those 2nd and 3rd and 4th plays, particularly with the same group, man, you're going to start to understand some real strategies and real decisions that you're going to have to make early or late to be in the game. And I like that. And then some of it just comes down to dice rolling. You are rolling a lot of dice.
Yeah. My other part, we didn't do a lot of this, but I really liked the dual allegiance courtiers. This would be in the Huguenot deck, but if he ever got played, when he's in the discard pile, the other line is blue. I, as the royalist player, could attempt to get him into my court. I'm going to roll some dice against the target number and try and get him, and then not only it's a 0 sum, he's mine now.
Yeah.
So you lost a 2 intrigue guy, I gained a 2 intrigue guy.
And that's a lot of the very cool elements about the game.
Yeah, right?
There's some great theme there. I think there's a lot of depth to it because you're not just playing cards. You're playing cards to keep them away from people. You're playing cards to do certain things. You're drafting cards to make sure you get what you need as my ally, and I keep. There's just a lot of layers, and I think it could have been better executed. Frankly, I think the board is just odd to me when I look at it. Even the angle of this, I'm not sure what they were going for. They should have just stretched it out to match the entire width of the board, and that would have made those bigger to be more easily read.
Here's what I'll do. I'm going to show you how the game plays, and I'll walk you through some of the components so that you have a point of reference to some of the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up with a few final thoughts. So, very briefly, here's a look at the board. And it's a smaller board, and again, this is a prototype copy, or a pre-production copy. So I don't know if or how many changes were made in it. So I take that with a pinch of salt. But I think we already talked about, whilst it looks great, the production is the major hindrance to the game. There's no holding boxes for any of these cubes or anything like that, and it's just like it's a fairly small city name, and the little symbol of the city, like this is a major city and this is a minor city that's like on a river, and it's just hard to see some of that, especially when you got cubes all over the place, which you have to have, and looking like in here for some of the names, you're moving stuff around, and it's very easy to like mess something up. And if you nudge the board, it's going to go horribly for you. We would also, I really, really like the nice old typeface that they're using, but it is not particularly easy to read. And so you're like looking at places and trying to really squint, and sometimes that gives away maybe some things that you're looking at, let alone some of like the little chits. Like these are small chits anyway, but I don't really have an issue with those. But the writing on them is so fine, you can't even tell what it is sometimes. So that's just one of the kind of issues that the game has from that particular kind of a production standpoint. But the game itself, like the actual mechanics of it, were very, very interesting. They were very fun. And as a 3-player game, again, there's not a lot of those. The 3-player game is a game of 2 people in an alliance against the third player. At some point in the game, that's going to switch. But you also don't win together as an alliance. One of the 2 of you will win within that alliance. So you are trying to defeat your enemy, but also hamper your opponent. And they're doing the same thing. And this guy is trying to defeat the both of you and pit you against each other as well. It's a fascinating balancing act, and I thought it was a really, really cool dynamic to the game. But gameplay-wise, there's a couple different phases. There's like a whole court deck phase where you're going to draft your kind of court cards, and you get to pick a couple, or some are given to you, and then you pass them on, and then your opponent's going to draw some and give you the crappy ones, frankly, and then pass them on, and then your ally, who you're working with, is going to draw 4 and give you the crappy ones, or give you the good ones if you're in a bad spot and the opponent's losing really badly. So there's like this whole drafting phase, which is neat. And then you go round and you're going to play your cards for either their, what do they call it? You're going to play either for your kind of your diplomacy value. I don't know, that's not what it's called. Is it your intrigue value, maybe? Or your military value if you're going to do something that needs a military bonus. And you're going to play through your hand. I'm going to do an action. You're going to do an action. The third player is going to do an action. And those are based on your little play aid card, again, which has some extremely fine font size in it. And you're going to either try to do some foreign diplomacy to try and get armies onto the board, or to get funds into the coffers to fuel the war phase later on. Or you might, you all use court actions, so you might try to kind of like, you can try to steal other people's cards from their court discards. So for example, I, as the blue royalist player, if I've got this in my discard, then I think the black Huguenot player can attempt to take him from me. and become aligned to them. And then that requires a die roll to do it. But it's the changing allegiances. It's in the game. It's neat. You can write a treaty. If you can write enough treaties, that's a lot of victory points that you can accrue doing that. You can do some surprise military attacks based on the cards that you've got. Or you can gain influence away from people, or as the royalist you can try to collect taxes and raise money from the populace, although they don't particularly like it. So if I'm trying to do a surprise attack, that's the time where I'm going to play this card, and instead of using the intrigue value, I'm going to use the military value, and in this particular region, which is Poitou, that's probably pronounced horribly, and this is where, if you know your French geography, you're not going to give your hand away. But if you don't, like me, you are going to look through to find that region, which is this region here. And again, this is in a different script than this, so it's not like that's easy to find. And you're going to conduct a military campaign against one of the cities that are in here. Now, I've only got this one and this one. We already control this one, so we would have to do it against La Rochelle. La Rochelle, in this instance, counts as like one of the big major cities like Paris, and it's really hard to do. But effectively, you're going to roll 2 dice, and you're going to add to it your little value of 2, and you have to hit a target number. But there's also negatives to that based on the size of the city that it is. And if you're successful, if you roll really well, you can take places over, and it's great. And it's a way just to kind of do some influence in these like regional people by regional personalities and things like that. And there's some cards where it's like, hey, this guy can do it in Anjou, which is also somewhere on the map. But again, trying to find where some of these are, if you're not a local historian, can be a little bit of a challenge. Some of them have a couple of options on them, so you could do it in either one of those places. You just, hey, let's say it was this place and this place, you just pick one of those and you try to do a little surprise attack against it. However, there's plenty of characters, like Catherine de' Medici. She doesn't have any. She can't do those surprise attacks. But she can do things like intrigues, trying to take cities away from other players. So surprise attacks you use against your opponent. The intrigue, which is called gain influence, you do against your ally. So there's all this tugging back and forth between your opponents and your allies, and how much do you want to try to openly screw them over because they then won't help you in later phases. There's really great table talk and negotiation in those. But basically you're going to go around, accrue armies that'll sit here in, kind of off-map in these areas that'll then march in later as well. Gain money in the coffers because you're going to spend money to march and feed your armies to do a big campaign, as well as you doing all these little minor kind of intrigue actions. Once you're done with all of that, that's the kind of the court phase done. Then you move to the war phase. This is Wars of Religion. And in the war phase, you'll have these armies, and there's like a whole procedure about, hey, we've got an army on the board here, and let's say we had kind of another army over here, and let's get the Huguenots an army, let's say it was up here in Spain. You're then going to go through all of your available kind of courtiers, and they have ranks on them, ranking from A, B, C, and D, and then they have qualities associated with them. You're going to assign them as the leader of those armies. And there's some rules about who can get assigned what and where, and like the king always has to be assigned to the largest of the royalist-aligned armies. Even if it's not a royalist army, their ally has a bigger one. The king's always in charge of the biggest army. Sometimes the royalist leader is not very good, and it does not feel fun to have to assign them to your best army. But you're going to assign leaders to all of these guys and kind of put them all out on the board. Here, let's put that one up here, this one. Well, let's get him a little red army down here. And then, just like you did with the court phase, you're going to go around taking turns. And this is where you've got this little matrix down here. You're going to activate an army. You're going to pay to activate them with the money that you've been accruing, either through diplomacy or if you've been taxing if you've been taxing, then that converts into money and troops. And you track how many troops are in each army off map on here. So Army 1, let's say you'd have a cube on here that said they have 6 strength in them. And if it's a 6 strength army, that's a 4 to 6, that's a medium-sized army. It means it costs 2 money to activate them, and when they move, they're going to roll 2d6. And on a 7+, they have to take attrition when they're done with that. Luckily, we rolled under that. They don't have to take attrition. If it's a small army, you don't even roll. If it's a large army, you don't roll, but you always take the attrition. You get a certain number of move points. So you're just going to move that many regions, basically. And then you're going to roll that many dice in combat. And so you're going to end up moving into an area, and you're going to try to, take this city. Oh, he's in this area. So we move over here, and we're going to try to take that city. This is a small little town, so we're just trying to roll dice against it. Hey, we rolled that, and a 5 or a 6 is a success, and the opponent's going to roll 1. Hey, they rolled a success as well. That's not great. But basically, you're going to then take that over, and you're going to also take a loss because the enemy did a loss to you, and then you have to spend an extra loss to refill the garrison and turn it to your side. So where you had 6 strength points in this army, you now only have 4. And so you go around capturing cities that way, but when you get into armies, you're going to fight against each other, and you're going to chuck dice against each other based on the strength points of your armies and how much you've got in there. You're going to throw dice. And you're going to do like a field battle, and it can get very bloody. And basically, anytime you lay siege to a town or you're in a fight, you're going to roll dice to see, I think on like a 10+ in a field battle, your leader might die or get captured, even if you win. It was a very bloody time, and a lot of people would die, and your leaders would be very valuable targets, so they would be very highly sought after on the battlefield. Even if you won, it was easy for guys to go missing or get killed or wounded, things like that. But you basically have this court phase where you're doing little bits and pieces and assembling money and building these armies, and then you have this campaign phase, and you're just marching across the board, trying to affect the board, trying to siege as many cities and get them over to your side as you can. And you keep going until you don't have any money or you don't have any troops. You can't hold anything over. Everything disappears at the end of the year. So you just kind of go, and you keep going. So it is imperative to do a good job of raising money and raising armies to have a good campaign phase. The interesting part of this is that the 2 aligned players, all the cities that they capture go to the royalist colours. They don't go to the league colours if you're aligned with the league. The league's way to take them off the royalist is to win them in battle and their royalist colours, and then in subsequent court phases to do intrigue to turn them red. And so managing your victory points about how and when how much you help and where you choose to assist without getting them over their victory conditions is extremely important and is one of the best facets of the game. So that's generally kind of a look at how it is. There's all these different event cards and things which you get like 1 or 2 of, and there's battle events that can just like screw over a battle, or it's like, hey, you take attrition, or you take no attrition, or you get an extra movement point, or you roll an extra die in combat. Little bits and pieces that zhuzh it up, but that's kind of the core of what this game is, and what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the game and the components. Again, this is a pre-production copy.
So it might slightly be different.
Yeah, so some of this might be subject to have changed, but we looked on Board Game Geek, and it didn't look
the same.
So like, some of the chits, the event chits and the leader chits have such tiny fine writing on them.
Oh my gosh.
I can't read it.
Well, and I really can't read it. You know, I need readers.
It was very tough to read some of that stuff.
Well, and I just thought to myself, this is an area move game, right?
Yeah.
Why did you make this chit so you could have doubled the size of that and doubled the size of the writing?
Yeah.
And I might have been able to see it, but unfortunately, it just I couldn't see.
The board is 18 by 22, I believe. And
The dimensions of the board are 18 by 22. The playing surface is something less than that.
yeah, because it's this little
Angled.
yeah.
I don't even know, was that like a
I don't know.
3D look at like a telescoping?
Because the artwork looks really nice.
It does.
The pieces on the board
it's
look
beautiful.
great, but
Make it bigger.
make the board twice the size, so it's standard wargaming size,
Yeah.
right? And flip it this way and make the map bigger because
Yeah.
the cubes were all on the names and the shapes of the towns.
Oh, this is a city or a town? I can't. Oh, it's okay. It's a city, and
And
it's
you're
like,
one sneeze away from you can't play the game anymore.
Right.
Because if you knock the cubes, there's no way to have remembered what's
Yeah.
what. It's done with.
Yep.
And
At
that's-
that point,
That is one of my pet peeves with like Euro games.
yeah,
And a lot of those have gone into like recessed boards or like
that would have been really
something
awesome.
specific where you can remember those
Yeah.
and things like that. And this doesn't have that, unfortunately. So it was always being extremely
Be careful. Yeah.
And you just felt like
I think I
try
dropped-
not to make any mistakes.
I think I dropped a die one time, and I'm like,
yeah, we knocked some over, and it was like,
yeah,
does anyone remember what we had? And it was like,
Yeah.
And why that's important is because in other games, right, things don't change hands very much, so you can kind of
No.
remember.
Yeah.
This one, the intrigue and the war and
Every round.
the surprise attacks, the cities change hands so often, it's almost impossible to like have a picture image of what you had.
yeah.
And so it's very hard to rectify any mistakes that could happen. So that
All of that being said, I know the three of us, I think all three had different opinions about the game.
Yeah.
Our friend from St. Louis, Mike, this is not his style of game. I would say that.
Sure.
Mike may be watching and saying, Grant, you're wrong. I don't feel like this is his style of game. I loved it. I loved the card play for all the reasons that I've already talked about. There were just some component and production things that I think could have made it much, much better.
Yeah, even like just like the font and the typeface
Yeah.
on some of the plays was so small.
Very hard.
The game was
Beautiful play. I
Yeah.
mean, beautiful things that you track your armies on, but
I really enjoyed the gameplay, but I did not like playing with the game.
yeah, you said that earlier, I think.
And I think that's where I'm at, like, because I love multiplayer war games.
Oh, no doubt.
I like the balancing act. I like the switching allegiances. I like that if I focus on this, this person's filling the vacuum, so I'm
Yep.
doing this and this and this. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, but like it was really hard to manage.
Yeah.
And at the end of every turn, half your guys die, and you get a bunch of new guys.
you have to go through them, then you
gotta-
have to take the chits
You
out.
got to rifle through all your cards
Yeah.
to do that. On the cards, it's much easier because
Yeah.
it's pretty clear. But it's a maintenance you got to do. But the chits, man. Oh,
Oh,
man.
yeah. Well, it was
It's
kinda
on-
funny.
It's on the back of the chits.
Yep.
But it was like we didn't know what that meant at first.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was kind of funny because I remember looking at the cards and then trying to match the portraits on the counters.
not possible.
More often than not, they're similar, but they're just a little bit different. And I was just like, I have no idea who this guy is. So I
Yeah.
actually wanted to just kind of throw him away, but I don't know. There's some production quality issues that I think need to be. And I know Fellowship of Simulations has done some very good games.
Yes, extremely
that
popular.
Verdun game is, which we still have on our shelf and we need to play.
Very popular though.
Very popular, very well thought of. I think this is a very good game. I just think it has some minor issues with the production.
And so, if you've got a production copy of this and it is different from
Please-
what we have shown,
please
let us
correct
know.
us.
Please let us know.
I would actually like to buy a production copy of this one.
Well, that's just it. If it's the same as this,
Yeah.
that would be a hard sell for me.
Oh, it would. You're right.
But if you double the size of this map and make the counters 1-inch counters, where I can read the typeface,
It would be that much better.
I'd be like, yeah, this is.
Well, I even remember thinking, damn, that turn track, those spaces are huge. That turn marker could be six timed
Yeah.
and still be fit. And I was like, oh, move this down, stretch it out. But once again, solid game. Really enjoyed
Yeah, the
this.
gameplay was
Very
really
cool.
enjoyable if you can get over the hurdles of some of the components that
Yeah,
are in it for
yeah.
sure. So, Wars of Religion,
One other thing, there is a history, the supplemental book, I think is what it's
there's
called.
the rule book and the playbook.
Yep. And I read some of that stuff, like when I got it. There's a lot of great information in there, and we love this,
and this
about
is
war games. It's like 30 pages.
It's like twice as big as the rule book.
Yeah, which is funny. But there's a lot of great detail in there about the history of the war,
all the different people,
the individual personalities in the courts,
which brings to life the courts. The court stuff's really fun because you're like, I recognize like 2 of the names in this game.
I recognize 0,
but like getting a little bit of flavor on some of those people, where you're like, oh, I play him, he relates to this area. And here's why. Yeah. Right? We love that stuff here at the Players Aid. And so it's fun to read through that stuff.
Because we play these games because we like history. I enjoy a good historical
And the
war
extra
game.
layer of context makes the game more flavorful.
Yeah.
I think, a bit more rich.
I will also say this. For a translated rule book, I thought this was pretty good.
Did we have any issues?
It wasn't organized very well. I didn't think so.
Sure.
There were a couple elements I remember reading it, but I could understand it.
There's no page numbers.
Well, and this may just be a pre-production copy, but I actually thought the rules were pretty decent.
They were. Yeah. I don't know if we. There was like one thing that I think we had to adjudicate, wasn't it?
Well, there was one thing that literally the same. It was like blankety blank blank. Or blankety blank blank, and it was the same thing. Oh. So Mike and I sat there and studied those 2 paragraphs.
Oh, that's right. I was upstairs.
And that was the only issue we had, and we ultimately, because of a paragraph prior, were able to say, this is what they meant, and we did that.
Yeah.
That was the only issue I think I found.
And that was us learning in the war phase.
Once again, pre-production copy, they probably cleaned that up.
Yeah. Everything else in it was... with... how much was in this game? Drafting, card play.
You would expect that rule book to maybe be thicker.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And like it could have been very easily very complicated.
Yeah.
And that was one of the credits of the game, I think, is that they packed a ton of stuff into this game.
Yeah.
And wasn't that difficult to learn. It really wasn't. Once you played a couple turns, you see how everything meshes together. Because there is a lot of mechanics in it, but then you're just like, oh, okay, cool. This is this. Mm-hmm. It reminded me a little bit of Crown of Roses, which we dabbled in from GMT. That had a similar feel from they kind of threw everything into that game. Mm-hmm. Is this phase, and then this very different phase that's a different game, and then this one, and you have to like set up each phase, and it was like kind of slow paced.
This was not as arduous as that one, though.
It had some.
But similar in some ways.
Oh, I was worried it would be, and it wasn't.
Right.
And I was really happy that it wasn't. It just kind of like...
Yeah.
It flowed a bit better than that one did. They've learned some lessons.
So my question to you, I think I have my answer. Would you ever play this less than 3-player? Because of
Can you?
Well, I don't even know. I'm sure you could. Maybe you can't.
There
doesn't appear to be a solo bot.
If you can play it at less than 3... I probably wouldn't.
Well, and I would agree with that because I think the dynamics
that's the best bit.
Between the 3 sides are one of the greatest elements.
I don't think
maybe it's just a 3-player.
And again, this is pre-production, so maybe there is a 2-player variant, but
I would like this.
Wouldn't want to.
I think you're 100% right, though. I would like to have this in my repertoire, right? Take it to cons where we want to play multiplayer games.
Yeah.
And Angola, Fire in the Lake, Wars of Religion, Here I Stand. And this is like we played for about 4 hours for the 3 turns, but that was learning the game. You had a break in the middle.
Even that long.
You don't think it was that long? Maybe it was 3 hours.
Yeah.
But the full game is like 6 turns. I think if you play the full campaign game.
Yeah, that's gonna be like a long afternoon.
Probably
or like
4
a good evening
hours.
Session. Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoyed it. Lots to like here.
Yeah, definitely worth having a look at. Wars of Religion from Fellowship of Simulations. Check it out if there's something interested.
And I really want to follow Mr. Jerome Lafranc.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like he has some ability.
Well,
and
yes.
We'll see if he has any other games that come up in the future. And they actually have 6 very nice looking games. We have now 2 of those 6.
Yes.
So I might want to look at some of those others. We got to get Verdun to the table.
Yep, I got it in shrink on the shelf. It's just one of those things.
That was part of our World War One extravaganza that we just kept buying and buying and buying. Oh, and now we've bought more. Oh, here you've got an Ipers. Ypres.
Oh,
So
yes. Check this out if this is something you're interested in. It's worth having a look for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, make your mind up. And if there's been changes to this, let us know because
Yeah.
I want to know. So appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.